Hey, Math 3 Honors. What's up? This is Sensei. I hope you guys are doing well. We're coming to the end here as far as 2020, the year of 2020. I don't know if you're watching this again in the future, then I don't know what's going on, but you're watching it. But we are going to be graphing trigonometric functions, sine, specifically sine and cosine, with a lot of with the parameters. We're going to be doing it with parameters, all right? So let's go ahead and get started without further delay. Make sure you got all your stuff going. You guys, you need to watch this video before you take the test. Action time now, right? We're bringing the action time. Get out of your bed. Get out of your bed right now. Get your pencil out. Get your paper out. We're going to rock it, okay? You're fired up. Okay, you're bringing it in. You're pumping it out. And you're graph it. Look what we're going to do, and here's what our parameters are going to look like. See that? See that y equals a times sine bx plus c plus k? You're going to own it. You're not afraid of that. I'm a little afraid. No, I'm not. Starring Sensei. All right, here we go. Hey, if you're fans, you may go ahead and click below or subscribe. Okay, now here's how we're going to graph this, okay? First thing I want you to do is write this down. Write this specific down. This is the function with all of the parameters. Okay, so now as we're looking at this, these are the letters that are going to represent the parameters. Okay, I have them listed. There's different letters that people use, but right now I'm going to use A, B, C, and K. Okay, now A is going to tell us the amplitude. Okay, that's the stretch, what we're used to seeing as the stretch, like how far up and down is our function going to go. B is going to help us with our period. Now remember, the period is how fast it takes the function to go around the unit circle. So normally without a b, if a b was 1 I should say, it takes it 2 pi to go around once. And then the C this is going to be like our H. It's the horizontal shift, and the K will be our vertical shift. Now, the C, the horizontal shift, we'll call that the phase shift. That's the phase shift, okay? The K is going to be the vertical shift. Okay, so go ahead and write all that down. Now, here's how we're going to calculate these. The amplitude is going to be the absolute value of A. That's going to be like from 0 to the very top, from the midline to the very top. Okay? The period, how fast does it go around the unit circle? Will be 2 pi divided by B. Okay, so just calculate, don't even think that much, just calculate it and that'll give you the period. That's how long it'll do one revolution. So up, down, up, right? That's what would be sine. Cosine would be up, down, up also, I guess. But, okay, phase shift. Okay, that's the left and right, right? We're going to determine that where our starting point is by bx plus c equals 0, solving for x. The vertical shift will just be the k. Okay, if k is plus 1, that means we go. That tells us where our horizontal, our midline is going to be. And then the scale. Now this is optional, but I'm liking this because if we do the period divided by 4, that's going to help us. It's going to make the graphing a lot easier. Okay, now let's look at the other thing we must know. So make sure you have all that written down before you start graphing this. Okay, so the first thing we do, that's y equals sine of x. Let's review what sine of x looks like. Get out your unit circle if you want. But we know at sine of x, we go at, here's how I'm going to graph this. Sine of x goes like this. At 0, sine is 0. At pi, sine, we're going to describe, we're going to graph, sorry, let me start over. We're going to break these down into 5 easy points, okay? If you look at sine of x, sine of 0 is 0, sine of pi is 0, and sine of 2 pi is 0, right? There's our 3 points. And at sine, we go pi over 2 is up, 3 pi over 2 is down, but then there you go, boom. That's your sine. So graph your zeros and then everything in between. What you do is graph the first, the last, the middle, then everything in between. The first, the last, the middle. So sine, the first is 0, the last is 0, the middle is 0, and in between the first and last you go up, you go down, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Cosine. Let's graph the first, the last, the 0. Cosine of 0, the first, we're going to start at 1. The last, which is 2 pi, that will also be at 1. The middle of sine, which is pi, that will be negative 1. And then, see, those are our two, and then the two in between will be 0, and then there's 1 period of cosine. Okay, so that's what's, just know those patterns for sine and, you know the patterns of sine and cosine? Just make sure, study that for a little bit if you don't know it. If you know those patterns, you're going to do great. Okay, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and you have all those notes. Make sure you have those notes as you're graphing that with me. As you're doing that, here's what, oh, look at that. Look at that, okay? We're going to graph that, mother, father. Okay, here we go. So, let's think about what we have here, okay? It'll take about a half a page for you to calculate all the stuff. We have the amplitude, the period, the phase shift, all that stuff, okay? So, let's go ahead and calculate everything that we have, okay? So, then we can graph it. And we're going to, in the test, I'm going to graph 2 periods, okay? So we've got the amplitude equals absolute value of A. My A is 3, so my amplitude is 3. Easy. Well, I think it's easy. The period, so let me circle my answers in pink so I know which ones I'm going to use. Okay. My period, remember that's how fast it goes around. Period is 2 pi over b. My b is 2, so it's 2 pi over 2, so my period is pi. That means I'll finish 1 revolution at pi radians. Okay, that's my period. Okay, my phase shift, that is going to be, well, here we go, watch this. It's not that bad, but it's 2x minus pi over 2 equals 0. Okay, so we just solve for it. So we're going to say add pi over 2, 2x equals pi over 2. I divide by 2 on both sides. That's the same as multiplying by 1/2. X equals pi over 4. That's going to be my phase shift, will be pi over 4. Okay? And so I have that. I should have done that in a different color, but okay, we're good. The vertical shift, that's my k, will be -1. And just to make it easier, our scaling, our x scale, that's how many ticks we're going to do with the x. So the x scale is going to be the period over 4. So the period is pi divided by 4, and that's just pi over 4. So that means every single tick mark of the x will be pi over 4. So that'll make things a little bit easier, because we're going to graph 2 periods of this. All right, so here we go. Let's rewrite. Hopefully I can get this all so you can see it in one screen. y equals 3 cosine 2x minus pi over 2 minus 1. Okay, so let's go. Now, in this, well, let's go and do our graph. And I'm going to do the graph because creating the graph is actually based on all this information. Okay. So we have a vertical shift of -1. That means at -1, that is where my midline is going to be. So I'm just do the midline first. And I'm going to draw the midline as dashers right there. Okay, there's my midline. Okay, now our amplitude is 3. That means I'll go above from -1. It's going to go up 3 high, so 0, 1, 2. So I'll go up to 2, and then down -1, 2, 3, -4. Okay, so that's my amplitude. So that's how high up it's going to. So the midline's going to be here, and it's going to go up 3, and then all the way down 3, and then down to the bottom 3. Okay. Now, the phase shift is pi over 4. Okay, so here's what this means. That means I'm going to start on my x-axis as pi over 4. And my scaling is also going to be pi over 4, so that kind of is convenient. So let's go like this. Pi over 4 will be right there. Now, one period. A period is going to be pi. So that means it's going to end at pi. So I want to find the ending point here. Okay, so the way I'm going to do that is I am going to figure out where it starts. If it starts at pi over 4, so I'm going to go pi over 4. Where is it going to end? Well, the whole period is pi, so it's going to end. I just add pi to that, right, to my pi over 4, because that's where it's going to end. So pi over 4 plus pi is going to be, you want to add them. We need a common denominator. Multiply top and bottom by 4, plus 4 pi over 4, which means it's going to, pi plus 4 pi over 4 would be 5 pi over 4. Okay, so that's where it's going to end, at 5 pi over 4. So that means, if these are pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4. It'll end right there. Okay, 5 pi over 4.
Nick, are you ready to do your math?
Now, because of my x scale, that means each one of these are going to, okay, so we got this, we got the midline at -1, we got the amplitude, because we know it's going to go up 3, we got the starting point of pi over 4, we know it's going to end at pi over 4. What the scale tells me is that each one of these is going to be an adding of pi over 4. So this is pi over 4, this will be 1 pi over 4, this will be 2 pi over 4, which will be pi over 2. This will be 3 pi over 4, and this will be 4 pi over 4, or just pi. Okay? Now I got my 5 points. Okay? So now we just do our cosine graph. How does cosine graph? You remember that? Remember. So let's do our first point. The cosine is going to graph at 1, but because of our scaling, we graph, our first point is going to be, our 1, instead of 1, we're going to be up. We know it goes, the amplitude says we go here. Start here. Our last point is also at 1, but now our new scaling makes us go up at 2. Our middle point will be at -1, but our lowest point would be -4 because we said this here. This is our lowest point. And everything in between, right? These two will be 0. And make sure you make it round. And there's my first scale of cosine. Now, keep on going to get another period. So that's going to be 5 pi over 4. This will be 6 pi over 4. Now let's do our next 5. For next, so that's one period. You get 5 points to go around a period. Let's do another 5 points, right? 1, so this will be, on our scale says add pi over 4. So this will be 6 pi over 4, or 3 pi over 2. This will be 7 pi over 4. This will be 8 pi over 4, which will be 2 pi. And is that 5? 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we need one more. 7.8.4. So we got 9 pi over 4. We just add pi over 4 to each one, right? So then do the same thing to finish it. Cosine, next period we start at the top. Our last one is we end at the top. Our middle point is we end is in the bottom, and everything in between is my zeros. Now, if you want to continue it to 0, you know that as the pattern says we have to go down at 0 here, so there you go. That's how you graph y equals 3 cosine times 2x minus pi over 2 minus 1. Okay, let's do another one, shall we? Okay, here's our next one. Y equals 2 sine times 2x minus pi over 2 plus 1. Let's go ahead and graph that one. Go ahead and pause and try to do that on your own. Okay, let's get our parameters first. Maybe you want to do the parameters first. Okay. My amplitude is going to be 2. And let's highlight that so we know. Okay, amplitude is 2. My period is going to be 2 pi divided by b, so it'll be 2 pi divided by 2, which is going to equal pi. So my period will be pi. Okay, my phase shift will be 2x minus pi over 2 equals 0, right? And we solve for x plus pi over 2. We already did this one, but 2x equals pi over 2 divided by 2. And my phase shift will equal pi over 4. Okay. My vertical shift is going to be positive 1. And my x scale equals the period divided by 4, which is pi over 4. Okay. So now, let's go ahead and do our graph. So go ahead, pause it, graph it on your own, see if you can graph it on your own. Okay. So, looking here, let's look at our vertical shift is +1. So, let's go 1, 2, 3, -1, -2, -3. Vertical shift is at +1. So we have here a shift of 1. That's our midline. Draw the midline first. That's the exact middle. Okay. Now we add 2. Our amplitude says we add 2 to it. So our high point, 1 plus 2 is 3. So this will be our high point, will be 3. And then 1 minus 2 will be -1. Oops, sorry, you missed that. Missed that on the graph. So there's my midline right there, okay? My amplitude is +2, so I go 2 from the midline, and I'm also going to go down 2, 1, 2 to -1. That's my low point right there. Okay? So my phase shift is going to be at pi equals 4. I'm going to open this up. So I'll say pi over 4. So that means I'm going to start at pi over 4, right? But where is it going to end? My period is going to be pi. Let me write my equation up here so you can see it. Okay, so my period means I'm going to end at, I got to add pi to that. But, you know, let me do since my scale is pi over 4, let me keep adding pi over 4 to these. So 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, which will be pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, which will be pi, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, which will be 3 pi over 2, 7 pi over 4, 8 pi over 4, which would be 2 pi, 9 pi over 4. We could just add those. I'm adding those in so that I can figure out where it ends. It just makes it nice and neat. But my scale tells me what to keep adding, pi over 4. Okay, so now, where is this going to end? We know it's going to start at pi over 4. Where is it going to end? Well, the way we calculate that out is we say, okay, we're starting at pi over 4. The period is pi, so we go pi radians later. That's where it's going to end. So pi over 4, 4 over 4, so 4 pi over 4. We add them, it's going to end at 5 pi over 4. That's where it's going to end, which is right here. It's going to end at 5 pi over 4. Okay? Now, we got 5 to go in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our first point, sine, starts at 0, right? So our first point, sine, starts at 0. Our last point, which is 5 over 4, sine, ends at 0. And the middle point, sine is also at 0 in the middle, right? Sine is 0 in the middle, right? The unit circle. The middle point, sine goes all the way to the top. The middle point here, sine goes all the way down to the bottom. And there's our first period. Now let's do the second period, okay? So we do the second period. This will be the first point. The the last point will be the fifth one over. 1, 2, will be, will be 5 over, which is actually pi. So it'll be 5 over. 5 pi over 4 plus pi will be 9 pi over 4. And if you don't know that, you can add it. 5 pi over 4 plus pi will be 4 pi over 4, which will be 9 pi over 4, which is 5 more over. 9 pi over 4. This is the last point. Okay, so which is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my fifth point. Okay, and here's my middle point. Okay, so it's sine. We go at 0. My last point will also be at 0, which is the midline. My middle point will be at 0 for sine. In between these, I'm going to go up to the top. In between these, I'm going to go down to the bottom. There's 2 periods of sine. Now let's just get it to 0 so it looks even. We know that once we hit 0, we'll be here. And so there you go. Whoops, I'm sorry. Whoa, that was very bad. That's not my 0. Sine, we're going to go back down. We're going to go down to my lowest point, which would be right here. Not that right there. Sine will go down to the low point. Right, that's my 0, and then I go down to the low. And there's 2 periods of sine. Okay, here's the last one. First thing, I want you to pause it and try to do the parameters, okay? Let's list the parameters as we know them, if you want. Well, you should know them. Do all the parameters. Go ahead and pause and do it. Okay, here we go. We have the amplitude is -1. I'm going to circle this in green. Sorry, I just started writing in orange. Okay. The period is equal to sorry. Hang on, ignore that. Period is equal to 1/2, which is my B. Oh, sorry. Okay, final thing. Period is equal to 2 pi divided by 1/2. Sorry, it's 2 pi divided by 1/2, which will equal, this is going to be a big one, 4 pi. Okay, that's my period. Because, you multiply by the reciprocal, you get 4 pi. 2 pi divided by 1/2 is 4 pi. My phase shift is going to be 1/2 x plus pi equals 0. So I'm going to take away pi. That's the left and right shift, right? 1/2 x equals negative pi. Multiply by 2 to get rid of that 1/2. X equals, that's pi. X equals negative 2 pi. That's my phase shift. So I'm going backwards, negative 2 pi. Okay? My vertical shift is equal to 2. And my x scale is equal to the period 4 pi divided by 4, which is going to be pi. And that's actually a pretty nice scale to have there. Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. Okay, so those are all my parameters. Okay, so let's go ahead and graph this. You guys see what I'm doing here? Sorry, let me get in the vision. Okay. Here we go. Let's go with the vertical shift, which will be 2. That means I'm going to go up. I'm going to go up 2 on the vertical shift. So let's go and do that. We'll go up 1, 2, -1, -2. That tells me where my midline is. So my midline is here at 2. So I'm just going to draw a little midline here for us to see. Okay. Now, this will be 3. And let's go -3. Okay. Now, my amplitude is -1. Well, what do you think a negative does? Let's ignore that for a second. But that just means my high point is going to be up 1. So my high point is going to be up here at 3. 1 above, 1 below, and 1. That's my low point. Okay? Now, my scale is going to be pi. My phase shift is going to be -2 pi. So guess what? What I need to change here? I should have done this earlier. -2 pi. We're going to start back here. Okay, we're going to start in the negative direction. That's where we're starting, at -2 pi. Okay? Let me go and write the equation here for you to see. Y equals negative cosine 1/2 x plus pi plus 2. Okay. So now, we're going to start at -2 pi, but our scale is pi. So, let's go every other. -1 pi, -2 pi. And my scale is pi, so I just add pi. That makes it real easy. So this will be -1 pi, 0, pi, 2 pi, and my period. Okay, so again, what I'm starting to see here is you just need 5 for a full scale. So I start here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are my 5 points. Okay, now you can also say, like what I've been showing you, is if you want to figure out where it starts and where it ends, you start at -2 pi, but a period is 4 pi, so I'm going to add 4 pi to that, right? And what do I end at? 2 pi, which is 5 points over. So we end at 2 pi. But anyway, we're going to end at 2 pi. But you can see my 5 points are going to be, whoops, hang on. Okay, so my 5 points are going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now remember, this is cosine, but it's negative cosine. So remember, here's my starting point. Cosine usually starts at the top, but because it's negative, it's going to start at the bottom right here. First point's at the bottom. That means the last point is also going to be at the bottom. My 5 points, 1, 2, 3. So my middle point will be here at 0. The middle point in cosine is actually at the top. Or the middle point is normally at the bottom, so the middle point here is going to be at the top, and everything in between is going to be at 0. So there's my 5 points. There's my period. Let's do another period. That means I need 5 more points. And my scale is I add pi every time. So I have 2 pi. Let's add another pi. 3 pi. Let's add another pi. 4 pi. Let's add another pi. 5 pi. Let's add another pi. 6 pi. Let's see. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now remember, cosine usually, here's the middle. Here's 0. Cosine usually starts at the top, but since I have a negative here, I start at the bottom. I will also end at the bottom. Midpoint will be 4 pi. Instead of being at the top, the midpoint will be, instead of being at the bottom, the midpoint will be at the top. And then I have 0. My 0 is in between, right? And you just go like that. Whoops, sorry, I went, my midpoint, this should be here. Sorry, dude, this is why I don't like it in pen. That's up 1 scale, not 2, right there. Anyway, that's what it should look like. That's how you graph y equals negative cosine times 1/2 x plus pi plus 2 with your parameters. That is going to be a test question, okay? That's as hard as it's going to get. Okay, guys, so that's it. Okay, that's how you graph with the parameters of trigonometry. Sorry, look at my hair. And you guys are going to have a test this week. I'm going to try to drop 2 videos today, so hopefully I'll get another one down for you. But make sure you practice this one. I have a feeling a lot of you aren't going to watch it, but watch it. Practice these. It's important that you know this for trigonometry, guys. Okay? So, that's a long video. This is Sensei, signing off.